Like I said, I really appreciate this. This is awesome. I'm here with Randy Couture. I talked to members of the military that are doing different and interesting things now, and man, this really takes the cake. Where I like to start off is what what do you think sort of sent you down the path towards the military to begin with? Like what was it like growing up, and you know and then that high school to military path? How did that happen? How did that play out for you?
Yeah, that's that's not a terribly glamorous story. I do have a military family. My great grandfather, my father, my uncle were all in the service. Um, I basically got my girlfriend pregnant right out of high school, and I walked on at Washington State University to try and wrestle in the state of Washington, and didn't make the team over Thanksgiving. It was our first big tournament. I got beat by a senior, so I ended up getting on a bus and coming home to Seattle for Thanksgiving that fall in 1982. And actually, it was that fall of 1981. I graduated June of 81 and then walked on at Washington State in that fall of 81. Came home for Thanksgiving, didn't make the team, went on a date with my old girlfriend. She called me about 3 weeks later. She was going to University of Washington. I was going to Washington State, which was about 8 hours across the state. She called me up after being home for Thanksgiving, said, "Hey, I'm pregnant." I went to the recruiter right away, took the ASVAB, qualified for any MLS I wanted to join for, and basically I had a new family on the way, whether I liked it or not. Obviously, it turned out great. Ryan's a great kid; he's my oldest, and but that's what led me to the service, was supporting a brand new family. And $5,000 enlistment bonus as an air traffic controller in 1982 was a lot of damn money. So I thought wrestling for me was over. I was going to be a soldier, take care of my family. I had no idea. I had aspirations of flying, of being in aviation, which was another thing that appealed to me about the air traffic control MOS in the United States Army. Recruiter convinced me that they gave more seats in flight school to active duty soldiers than they did to civilians, so that I had a better shot at getting into flight school if I was enlisted. So I enlisted. I did get into aviation and became an air traffic controller. But my first duty station was Germany, and I ended up, at the peak of the Cold War, there were 5 million soldiers stationed in Central Europe, and they had huge sports programs. One of those was wrestling, and I ended up back on a wrestling mat. Ultimately made the All-Army Wrestling team, and got to represent the Army in the Inter-Service Championship, which qualified me for the Olympic trials in Greco-Roman wrestling. So I was thought I was heading one direction, and fates had me back on a wrestling mat, back chasing that Olympic dream. As a kid, I had Olympic aspirations of being a skier. Obviously, I never went down that road, but I ended up on a wrestling mat. Seemed to have an affinity for the individual combative sports like wrestling, and the rest is kind of history, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. So did I take it you were more interested in the aspects of wrestling than pursuing that flight aspirations, I guess?
Yeah, I still thought about that. I mean, even after I got out of the service, I thought about going and getting my fixed wing rating and all of that, but it just was so busy competing both on the national team and then in college and then as a professional athlete, that all of that stuff, those thoughts of flight school or becoming a pilot, all kind of fell by the wayside. And I became very, very focused on first making that Olympic team. And then obviously that that shifted after 2000. I retired from wrestling completely and just focused on fighting. But fighting, I mean, I fell into fighting. It was an accident. Did it on a whim, honestly. It looked like fun. I saw the application of years of wrestling. Knew a couple of other wrestlers that you probably know, Don Fry and Mark Coleman, who were both very, very good wrestlers, guys I'd competed against in wrestling. And they were both in MMA, fighting and making a living as a professional athlete. So I was immediately attracted to it because I knew them and competed against them.
Did you know them from your Army days or from training against them through on the Olympic team, or how'd that work?
No, I met them more through college, through my college days and college wrestling. I had very limited exposure. In the 6 years I was in the Army, I spent 4 of those 6 years wrestling for the Army, and working my way up the ladder and developing the confidence and the belief in myself that I could compete at that level. By the time I was leaving the service, I was just breaking into being a nationally ranked Greco-Roman wrestler, qualified for the CISM World Championships that summer, just before I exited the service, and won my first world championship on that military wrestling team in Palermo, Sicily, at CISMs, at the CISM Wrestling Championships, which was a huge, and then that was the same summer that I tried out for the '88 Olympic team, as a soldier, representing the Army and representing myself. I was an alternate on that team. I didn't make the team, but I was pretty close, and I climbed into the national rankings that same summer. All that happened in that same summer, after wrestling and representing the Army for 4 years. So I don't think before that I ever had the inclination or the confidence in myself to be able to compete at that level. The Army instilled that in me. My teammates, my coach, all those other guys that I wrestled to win an inter-service gold medal and all those things that qualified me for that Olympic trials was all kind of part of that journey. And I think a pretty important formative part of ultimately my success and where I ended up.
It's kind of funny how everything sort of, it doesn't seem like it's going the right way at one point in time, but then then it just gives you that push, I guess.
Yeah, I think you never know. You never know what the plan is, how things are going to unfold, what doors are going to open to you. And even then, taking those risks and walking through those doors, taking advantage of those opportunities, you just never know. And I had assumed, had a new family at 19 years old, joined the service to support them, and had sold my car in the first place to even get to Washington State to college. I literally didn't have anything. So things worked out. I ended up in the places I was supposed to be. I ended up meeting the people I was supposed to meet, that ultimately led me down this path and led me to, 20 years on the national team wrestling and 14 years as a professional fighter, as a professional athlete. So I don't think you could have planned it that way. It just worked out that way.
Do you think there's anything different about how your path turned out, based off of going through the Army route rather than going through, had you gone to, like, had you done that walk on, had that gone through, do you have any scope on how that might have played out differently?
Well, I could have, you can look back and question some of your decisions. I had offers out of high school to go other places. I had a guy from a junior college at Santa Ana that was chasing me to come down there and do 2 years of junior college in California, wrestling for them. And they were a feeder program. At that time, the junior college program in California was very, very strong. A lot of the national coaches would go to California State Junior College Championship just to recruit top athletes. And Santa Ana was a feeder program for Oklahoma State, which is where I ultimately ended up anyway. But and they're one of the top wrestling schools in the country traditionally. So you just never know. I certainly assumed with a new family on the way and joining the service that wrestling was done for me. I had no idea they even had an inter-service wrestling championship, let alone an Olympic qualifier through the armed forces. So those doors opened, being stationed in Germany, the peak of the Cold War, the focus in the military services on Greco-Roman wrestling rather than freestyle wrestling. Freestyle is a lot more akin to collegiate style and folk style, technically speaking. Double legs, high crotches, single legs. Those are all things you do in freestyle. They're also things you do in college style wrestling, what I did in high school. I had never been exposed to freestyle or Greco, but because freestyle was so much like folk style, like collegiate wrestling, I gravitated towards it and seemed to be pretty good at that. Fell into Greco, had never done it, never seen it. Accidentally got called into matches in Greco, and then it turned out being my favorite style. And down the road became the style that applied most effectively to professional fighting and mixed martial arts. So things could have gone a whole bunch of different ways. I could have chose, instead of walking on at Washington State, I could have chose to go and take that deal at Santa Ana Junior College and gone 2 years there. And then maybe as a 20-year-old junior college wrestler, ended up at Oklahoma State too at that stage in my life. But obviously that's not what happened. That's I ended up in the Army. I ended up in Europe. I ended up wrestling Greco. I ended up qualifying for the 88 Olympics as a soldier in Greco-Roman wrestling, which, I had no inkling of ever being into professional fighting or any of that. It just turned out that style that they focused on and that I specialized in happened to be a great style for fighting and mixed martial arts. So, you can say what you want, but I look back and probably made some mistakes and made some poor choices here and there, but everything seemed to fall into place and I ended up where I ended up. And I mean, how can you think you'd go back and change any of that? I don't think you would.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like, you were fairly early on willing to take some major risks. You put aside some of your plans to take care of your family, and then the risk that you took from there, getting into Greco rather than saying, no, I'll wait around for next year because I know this other thing better.
Yeah,
it seems like there's been
pretty interesting. I think early I was on autopilot. I had blinders. I grew up with a deadbeat father. It was not a very big part of my life at all. And so when I heard I'm having this baby with or without you, I kind of went on autopilot. I was like, I'm not going to be like my dad. I'm going to be part of this kid's life. I'm going to raise him and do all the things that my father never did, that my dad never did. And joining the Army was a means to that end, to take care of them and do what I needed to do. And that, lo and behold, opened up all these other doors that obviously I was a one-time state champion from Washington my senior year in high school. It wasn't it's a fairly strong grassroots wrestling movement, but wasn't nationally known for a powerhouse of wrestling, which is probably why I never got any scholarship offers coming out right out of high school as a one-time state champ. I think spending that 6 years in the Army, finding wrestling in the Army, getting on that international stage, starting at that level in Germany with all those soldiers and competing then against all the other services. I mean, it ratcheted up my confidence and my belief in my abilities to be able to compete. And I don't know if it had worked out, honestly. If I'd have went to Santa Ana and tried, like every other high school kid coming out of high school, trying to get a college scholarship and go to college, I'm not sure, honestly, if it would have worked out for me. I think I needed that maturity. I needed that kick in the ass. I needed that regimen that fit me very, very well. And I think ultimately going to college at 25 years old as a 25-year-old freshman at Oklahoma State, I mean, I had a leg up. I wasn't some 19-year-old kid. I'd lived a little life. I knew what I wanted. I was very focused on my goals and what I wanted to achieve at that point. So, again, I think things worked out the way they were supposed to. Now, had I made that 88 Olympic team, I was a dark horse at best. Nobody knew who I was. All these college coaches had no idea who I was. They're like, where did this kid come from? He just placed as an alternate for the Olympic team. I've never seen him. I was 19. I had 4 years of eligibility. So the phone started ringing. Hey, we want you to come wrestle for us. And that was a big decision for me. I had 2 kids by then. I'd been married for, I think 7 or 8 years. And deciding whether or not to get out of the service with 2 kids and go to college or take a scholarship, or stay in the Army and keep chasing the Olympic dream that I was already on, with the Army supporting me. It was a big decision for me, and a scary decision, with 2 kids to decide at 25 to go to college. It was a tough one, but coach pushed me. He as much as he wanted to keep me on the team, he knew that the best thing for me was to get out, to go get that college degree and wrestle at Oklahoma State. That was probably there in that 4 years wrestling there was where I learned to believe I could win. Now, I believed I could compete through the Army, but I think at Oklahoma State, I took it to a whole new level, and I believed I could win at that level. Now I still came up short, again, thinking about how everything happens for a reason. There's a plan. I believe if I'd have, less the 2 collegiate championships, I was in the finals my junior and senior year for the NCAA championships, and managed to take second both times, which was a huge disappointment. I mean, you wrestle all year long for that opportunity to be that NCAA champion. I got into the finals. I was right there, and twice failed. And if you get caught up in that, that fear of failing becomes a big part of who you are. And now you're a lot less willing to go out and risk what you need to risk, especially in an individual combative sport like wrestling or fighting. I went on in 92 and 96. I was the number 1 guy in my weight class for Greco-Roman to make the world team or the Olympic team. 92, 96 are Olympic years. So I was expected to make those teams, to win medals, to be the Olympian. And I managed in both of those trials, even though I had been the number 1 guy and dominated the weight class, to come up short and not make the team in 92 and 96. Now, I think if I'd have won those medals, if I'd have made those teams and won those medals, I would have been content. I would probably be a college wrestling coach somewhere right now. I would have never forayed into MMA. I would have never been, that fire would have been quenched. It would have been satisfied. And because of those failures and dealing with that, I was still hungry. And after the 96 trials and devastated, spent 4 years, had been the number 1 guy and dominated my weight class, and still managed to take second in the Olympic trials and not make the team. I was crushed. But here comes MMA 4 or 5 months later. My first view of MMA, seeing 2 guys I competed against in college wrestling and freestyle wrestling, both doing well in this crazy sport in a cage. And I said, man, I got to try that. I think if I had made that team in 96 and won my medal, I would have been like a lot of other guys and just gone on, taken that college coaching job and been happy in the world of wrestling and never tried out the sport of mixed martial arts. And look what I would have missed. I would have missed 14 years and 6 titles and all that journey. And that was full of ups and downs too. But I think those failures in wrestling prepared me for the volatility in the sport of mixed martial arts. Hell, I had a 19-11 record in fighting. Everybody's like, oh my God, you won 6 world championships. Yeah, that means I lost it at least 5 times, asshole. And the truth is I lost it all 6 times. So I think you don't always judge championship character by how he responds when he wins. A real champion steps up when he loses. He faces that adversity. He gets back on that horse. He gets back out there, and he competes again. He wins again. So, and that was certainly my journey.
Yeah, you see a lot of guys that it seems like you see a lot of guys with these undefeated records, but are they taking, are they jumping up and down weight classes? I mean, you've aside from 6 world championships, you were the heavyweight, and then you stepped down a class as well. So I mean, both of those going up and going down and going back up again. They're that's again, on that risk taking.
Yeah, well, I think I'd already failed in some of the biggest matches you could be in. And guess what? The sun came up the next day, and the people that really mattered in my life didn't go anywhere. They didn't care whether I won or lost. They were there regardless. And everybody else who cared whether I won that title or won that match didn't matter in my life. That's the truth. They had no real influence. They're fans. They're fans of the sport of wrestling, or the sport of fighting. And so I think keeping it very simple that way, not being afraid to lose, because I'd lost. I'd already experienced it. I've been through it. I've been through that, that dismal feeling of working so hard for something and coming up short. And I think because I had that mindset about it, that I wasn't scared of it, I'd already been through it at the highest level. I was okay with going back out there, picking myself back up, seriously analyzing my mistakes, what I could have done better, where I can improve, and going back out there and getting after it again. And I think that was the important part for me. Some of those losses were way more important than the title wins, because those losses forced me to analyze, forced me to make changes, forced me to really look at what I was doing as an athlete and a man.
So I've heard you talk about like your eye, your wrestler's eye, and then how you strategize for your fights, all the planning and preparation that you do before your particular fights. How is that different from when you're first getting started to when everybody that you're fighting is world renowned?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously the stakes get higher as you move up the ladder, up the food chain, if you will. I didn't start analyzing and looking at and scouting. That's what in wrestling and international wrestling, we scouted. I got taken to Europe to watch the Europeans and film matches, because those were the guys we were going to have to beat at the Worlds. How did they score? How did they get scored on? Where did they seem to like to be? You literally fill out a sheet scouting them, because we know down the road we're going to have to beat them to win the medal, to win the championship. And that was a mentality that was fostered both in collegiate wrestling at Oklahoma State. Coach Burnett, oh man, we watched the tape, we can fix it. I know it. We know, here's the situation, and here's how you got out of position, and here's how you got scored on. We can fix that. And here, look what he did right here. You can take advantage of that. You can score on him there. That mentality of kind of analyzing, that's the kinetic chess part of wrestling and fighting. It's funny, we were just watching The Queen's Gambit on Netflix, and I've said, fighting is kinetic chess 1,000 times in interviews, and a lot of people don't get that relationship. But I'm sitting watching this movie about this female chess player, and it again just stuck out to me how she was processing, how she was literally studying the moves of her opponents, so that she knew how to deal with them when she had to play them. And that was exactly the mentality that I had from wrestling and transitioning into fighting. That guy poses problems. Every guy I stepped on that mat with or up in that cage with poses problems. And I have to figure out how to solve those problems with the tools that I have. Sometimes that might take me developing some new tools or refining the tactics and tools that I have. But sometimes I may already possess the tool, and it's just a function of putting it in the right place. But that was just how it worked for me. And some people, sometimes when you get it right and that game plan is good, it's a really good night. And sometimes when you get it wrong, it's not so much fun.
Yeah. So touching on that, and then touching on something that you've said, like some of your losses were, as important or more important than a lot of your wins. One of the ones you've brought up in the past is your fight against Nogueira. What is it about that fight that makes you feel like it's like that loss was so important to your development and helped you further?
Well, I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me in that loss was I'd spent so much time preparing for his grappling capabilities and his submission skills. And we kind of knew which holds and how he set up those holds. Neil Melanson was my ground coach and who I got my black belt in jiu-jitsu and catch wrestling under. And we broke him down and studied him at length for that entire camp. And I went out, probably should have made some adjustments and made him wrestle me more and take him down more instead of trying to strike with him. Analyzing some of his performances before, he'd been clipped, he'd been knocked out. People were questioning his chin. Now, he had said he was sick in those matches and all that, but there were questions about whether or not he could take a shot anymore. Obviously, I hit him with everything in the kitchen sink in that fight, and he was still standing there smiling at me. So his chin wasn't an issue. But I trained and got into some situations on the ground, especially with him, that a lot of guys wouldn't have got out of. He would have submitted them. And because we'd done our homework, because we trained those scenarios and those situations that he liked to set himself up for, we managed to get out of those pretty dire situations, the arm triangle, and I think one other pretty good submission attempt he had. Obviously, I think if you get knocked on your ass in two rounds in a 3-round fight, you're probably not going to win, which was the case in this. I got, he pasted me twice, knocked me on my butt. But it was a great fight. I gave it everything I had. I did every single thing I trained to do. I just didn't win, which at the end of the day, it's not always about winning or losing. I learned a lot in that fight, and I did everything that I wanted to do except get the judge's decision.
That's awesome. So a lot of their, combat sport involves a lot of mental toughness, and you've talked about days wrestling that you were spending 90 minutes straight in one match. What is it that keeps you from quitting, and how does somebody build that sort of mental toughness? How did you build that mental toughness over the years?
I think we all have that barrier in us, that place where your brain starts telling you you're tired. Your brain starts telling you you should quit. Every single person has that wall, that barrier. And I think through the sport of wrestling, we challenge that barrier all the time. And that you're talking about a grind match. Coach Frazier, one of our national coaches, he was an Olympic champion in '84 in Greco. That was one of his tools. Everybody needs to find that barrier. If you're not willing to challenge yourself physically and mentally, you won't know where that barrier is. And that's what a grind match was designed to do. Find that place in your mind and in your body that you're wanting to quit. And the more you challenge that and make yourself push that back, the more confidence you get that you can go a lot longer and a lot harder than your brain is telling you can. And that only comes by putting yourself in being willing to put yourself in those situations. And obviously, I had coaches that understood that, and they put us in a lot of crazy situations to find out where that breaking point was. Where was this guy and that guy and that guy? They're analyzing a whole team in weight classes. Where were those guys going to quit? And try and find that barrier and push that barrier back continually. Certainly something that I tried to do as a coach at Oregon State, doing shark bait matches and making those guys operate in that survival mode where they're so tired, they don't have time. They don't have the physical aptitude to go any harder. They're literally trying to survive and get through those minutes, through those rounds. And that's where you find that barrier and that breaking point. Now, certainly the Army was pretty good at that too. 12-mile rucks and doing push-ups and stuff like that till you quit. And I mean, there were a lot of things that challenged those things in the Army as well. Both that physical and mental structure, how you see yourself and where you really are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were fighting from high school till you were 48 years old. How did you keep your body together?
Wrestling, yes. Wrestling, yeah. I started wrestling at 10 years old for all the wrong reasons. I started competing to try and get that deadbeat dad's attention. It didn't work. I don't think he ever saw me wrestle a single match, not one, in my entire career of wrestling. But I found my place. I found my calling, the thing that made me tick. And through that process of challenging yourself physically in an individual combative sport where there's no teammates to hide behind. If something goes wrong out there, it's because you weren't prepared or you made a technical mistake. You're never more exposed and vulnerable than you are in the center of that mat or out in the center of that cage. And that in and of itself breeds a particular mindset. Certainly the military programmed me a particular way to pay attention to detail, to be able to push myself in a lot of ways. But I was already kind of wired that way from junior high and high school wrestling, through having coaches like Coach K. Spear and Coach McAvoy that pushed us, were disciplinarians, made us work, challenged us both physically and mentally, and then walking out there and competing every single week for 3 or 4 months during a season. Sometimes you're wrestling 3 or 4 times a week, depending on the week. And college was no different. The grind in college is pretty amazing. If you ever gone to the NCAA wrestling championships, I mean, you're going to see guys make weight every single day for 3 days and wrestle 5 matches to get to win a championship over the course of 3 days against the best competitors in their sport. It's a grueling week. And wrestling was that way through college as well. Same thing in international competition. You know, the competitions are spaced out more, but when you go to a national tournament, you're probably going to wrestle 6 to 9 matches over the course of that weekend. And every one of those matches counts towards where you're going to end up, where your outcome is going to be. And that constantly putting yourself out there in that circumstance and that vulnerability, there's no way you don't develop some form of mental toughness to deal with the adversity of all of that. And so that's one of the things I love about the sport of wrestling, because I think it breeds that mental toughness. It's a by the number sport. You put yourself in these awkward, weird, unnatural situations and physical places and against a resisting opponent. Every practice, everybody you're wrestling with they're trying to put you on your butt and pin you every single day. And that, I mean, you got to be prepared for that. And that's going to develop that character, that mental toughness.
To me, you come across as, one of the more humble fighters. And, it seems like there's some fighters, they're very humble. Like I remember, like one of Forrest Griffin's last fights, he's, him and his opponent, they're back and forth all of the pre-fight, dialogue was all them talking about how honored they're to fight the other guy. And I just
one thing he's done better than me. Oftentimes he's put the fight where he's better than his opponent.
I just like your opinion on humility versus there's also some fighters that are very, very showy and they don't take that they don't take the humble route.
So that, well, we're all wired different. We all have different fears and different psyches, and sometimes that bravado and that upfront stuff is to cover up some of those fears, and some of that's just that simple fear of failing, fear of being exposed. So sometimes, but also sometimes that talk is become a marketing thing too. And I think it started with Tito. He was one of the first guys to market himself through talking trash, and obviously, other guys came along down, Phil Baroni, Chael Sonnen, Conor McGregor now, Kobe Covington. All these guys are being rewarded for talking, for creating publicity stunts, in essence. A lot of that's not genuine. It's rare that you see that genuine animosity between two combative sports athletes. It does happen, but it's rare. most of the time it's contrived. They're either covering up for their fear of failure, or their innate fears, or they're just trying to create heat and promote the fight because they think they're going to be rewarded for that down the road by selling tickets and creating interest. And there's a fine line you walk there. For me, it never worked. First of all, I don't know anybody in the combative sports athlete that hasn't had their ass kicked good at least once. Through the training process or somewhere along the way, you've been humbled. You've had your butt handed to you. Maybe it didn't make you quit, but they definitely worked you over to the point where you're questioning what you're doing. And I'm certainly in that boat. I'd had my ass handed to me plenty of times. So I know about the time you think you've got it all figured out and you're cock of the walk, somebody's going to come up with a bat and knock you right off that limb, right off of that perch that you put yourself on. And I think that's where that humility comes in. I try to start with, begin with humility, act with humility. Every single person I meet is better at something than I am. And with humility, I keep an open heart and a clear mind to be able to experience that and challenge that and learn from them and become better at something. Every person you meet is better at something than you are. And if you look at it that way and you start with humility, act with humility, end with humility, you put yourself in a position to improve, to learn from that situation and that person. And at the end of the day, that's always going to make you better.
Speaking of making you better, you were fairly dominant. I mean, you incredibly impressive resume in UFC, and then started dabbling in acting. How was the transition? Was that just like, let me dip my toes in here, or was that like, all right, I've got this opportunity, let me take it and run with it?
Yeah, it was something that was intriguing and interesting. It's not something I ever saw myself doing. I think I was in the 6th grade Christmas play. I mean, that was it. I was never into any of that stuff. I was pretty solely focused on athletics my whole life. And the door opened, the UFC called me, Chuck, and Tito about playing a cage fighter in a movie called Cradle to the Grave with Jet Li and DMX. And I'd done some commercial stuff that was SAG oriented. So I already had basically Taft-Hartley'd in for a Screen Actors Guild card, for my union card for acting, which is hard to get. And so I was like, well, yeah, that sounds like fun. I'd like to try that. So we were all three in that movie. I had one line in the movie, but it's like going to Oz and kind of looking behind the curtain and seeing the guys pulling all the levers and making all the smoke and fire. It was interesting, and I immediately became intrigued with the process. I spent my whole life as an athlete boxing up my emotions and setting them to the side and staying laser focused on what I trained to do in that athletic endeavor. Never been one to be emotional or have emotional outbursts or even show emotion in a lot of circumstances. And now in this whole acting thing, they want you to let that stuff out, to show that stuff, to tell the story through that. And so it's something very foreign to me and very weird, and but intriguing at the same time. So I kind of fell in love with the process of finding a character and portraying a character and telling the truth. I mean, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to use your own stream of experience to portray that character and do the things that he does in the story. But you're trying to tell the truth. If you're just trying to act, nobody's going to buy it. It's not going to come out. And that's why I think when you see some of the best actors or think of, their characters are all very similar because they're all tapping into their own stream of experience to find and relate to that character and portray him or her. So that's just kind of, and so I'm fortunate that athletics opened that door and created that opportunity for me. Obviously, while I was still fighting always came first. It was never going to take a job that was going to conflict with a training camp or a fight. So I'm juggling, but I've been a master juggler literally since I left high school and, joined the Army, had a family, went to college. I mean, I was juggling all these balls and this just became another thing to juggle. It was juggling fighting and wrestling at the same time. And it was acting and wrestling, or acting and fighting Now, since I retired from fighting, I can solely focus on getting better acting jobs and becoming a better actor. I'm also interested in learning the other side of the camera, learning more about directing and the production side of things, and how to create that imitation environment that we make look real and people can relate to.
Do you have any concerns about being typecast? Because obviously you got hired as for your ability to play an action hero, and you've been cast several times like that. So what's your concerns on being typecast?
Yeah, well, I think that absolutely, there's no doubt about that. That's absolutely how people are going to see me. I got cauliflower ears, and I think fighters bring a certain authenticity and physicality to the roles that they play. That's going to gravitate right towards the action genre. I'm not getting the opportunity to play a lot of leading men in rom-coms and things like that, although I'd love to do that. But I've always loved the action genre anyway. So, getting a chance to challenge myself, step outside of the box was one of the reasons I joined, and agreed to do Dancing with the Stars, show a different side of myself, show other things that I'm capable of and interested in. And that's a slower process to get people to look past, oh, he's just that cage fighter that's trying to act, and start looking at you as a bona fide real actor that can actually, find a character and portray accurately what you need to portray. So that's always going to be the rub. That's going to be the challenge. I think a lot of people are always going to look at me, especially with these knobby ass ears, as an athlete first. And that's okay with me. It's not like that's a bad thing. But there is a hurdle there, I think, to get over to be considered a bona fide, real actor and not just an athlete trying to act.
I think you've got your idea for your directorial debut. Guy's MMA fighter, and he falls into this wild rom-com romance.
Yeah. Well, I certainly feel like I'm capable of pulling that off, but that opportunity hasn't presented itself really yet.
Yeah. I
have played a few leading characters now, Hijacked and Antidote, and some of these other films that are out. I've gotten to certainly play the lead and carry the ball, if you will, but I've yet to kind of land that big role.
Yeah. Do you see most actors at at your level and higher, does it come across as they're at a similar seriousness as you, or do they come across as more natural, or how do they approach their getting into character, their craft? How do you think they do it different?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it's a very personal thing. Certainly been around a lot of other actors, and I think that's one of the best parts of being in the Expendables is watching how the other guys operate, how they come to set, how diligent they are, how prepared they are. If you're trying to emulate somebody, Sylvester Stallone is a pretty good guy to learn from and emulate, because he literally built it from the ground up, has been on every facet of a production, and knows his audience, knows where his wheelhouse and his strong suit is, and he plays to that. He's very, very smart about that. You see the dichotomy and the difference between a guy like that, or a Schwarzenegger, or a Willis, or Harrison Ford, compared to a guy like Jean-Claude Van Damme or a Mickey Rourke, or, a little bit different animal, a little bit different approach. And I think you see that in their trajectory and career path as well, the ups and downs and the inconsistencies, where those other guys it's literally been a straight arc up. Those other guys are kind of all over the board. You tell me which guys you want to emulate and try to follow in their footsteps. It's glaringly obvious how I want to be as a professional and as an actor. Not that those other guys are bad or anything like that. They just have a little bit different approach and a little bit different lifestyle than these guys that I've gotten to be around and see how they operate and who have made 30-year careers out of acting, 30 plus year careers out of acting. And it's been steady and consistent and all those things that you'd want in a career.
So what sort of parallels do you draw between acting and fighting? What do you think is the most similar, and what were your lessons learned from fighting that you're best able to apply to acting?
It's interesting because, well, certainly that work ethic that I possess from wrestling and fighting carries over very well to acting, and I think to almost any profession, but certainly to acting. One of the similarities is you step out on set, geared up in front of that camera, it's go time. You're vulnerable. It's that similar fear of looking stupid, screwing it up. There's a very, very similar mindset and vulnerability in both those endeavors. That's where that diligence and that work ethic and being coachable, listening to the people around you, knowing your cues, and being prepared, all those things that came from fighting and wrestling translated very well to acting in that regard. There was certainly a lot of things to learn too. Stunts, I started in stunts, and on Oz, the HBO episode Oz with Doug Crosby, he's been a mentor and a friend from my very first acting gigs, and learning how to do things and know the line of the camera and how to make it look. You can't punch somebody. I've accidentally done that, and most of the stunt guys don't like it when that happens. Some of them do; they're crazy too. But most of them, you can't go around certainly beating up the stars of the movie or any of that. They're learning, being a real fighter and learning to translate that to movie fighting, so it looks right and it looks real. And because we're physical persons, we usually can do that really well. But there's an adjustment period there. I ran over Jet Li in Cradle to the Grave. He was supposed to get out of the way, and he didn't get out of the way. Now the second unit director wasn't very happy with me when I ran over the star of the movie, but it was part of that learning curve. I had to figure things out and learn about that line of the camera and how to throw a proper punch in a movie, which is different than a proper punch in a fight. So that was certainly some growing pains throughout there. Memorizing dialogue and all that stuff, that was never really an issue for me. I was a foreign language major in college. That's a lot of rote memory to learn a foreign language as an adult. So memorization was never a real problem for me, but learning or figuring out how to relate to that character, how to portray him and tell the truth was the big challenge. I could memorize the lines easily, but then giving it feeling, giving it context, putting that part of you in it that makes it real and tells the truth, that's the challenge. That's the hard part.
What's your relationship like with your acting coach versus what it was like with your coach back in the UFC or back in wrestling days?
Good. I always had a good relationship with coaches. I was never one that butted heads with coaches. I may not always agreed with everything that they wanted me to do or everything that they said and did, but I was never one of those guys that butted heads with my coaches, and the same is true of my acting coach. He makes me do a bunch of improvisations and puts things in these contexts that I can relate to. I learn the lines for a movie, and we can go back and forth and read the parts, and then he'll say, okay, now imagine that your soon-to-be ex-wife is keeping your kids from you, and she won't allow you to see your kids until you pay her more money. And now go back to that same dialogue that we just did with that little layer over the onion and tell that same dialogue. It's going to come out completely different from a completely different place. That's actually something I can relate to. I've been through divorce and kids were involved and it's never pretty, and there are a lot of emotions, real emotions wrapped up in that experience. And when I add that layer of the onion to the context of that character, he takes on a whole different meaning and a whole different life. So, that's kind of the trick. And that's what I learned with Barry Primus, my acting coach. He's an older guy. He's been done everything from musicals and writing to producing and directing. But predominantly he was an actor, and so him and I just immediately hit it off from the first time we sat down together to go over a scene, and I learned a ton from him. He's a great guy.
So from where you're at now, where do you want your acting career to go within the next, say 5 years?
I just want to continue to be challenged, get better roles, more interesting, jobs, and I want to continue to learn more about the production side of things and the directing side of things. At some point, I want to try my hand at directing and telling the story. I got the chance a year or two ago to direct a music video, which was fun and a kind of a good litmus test, a good kind of test run to see. Obviously, that's a much smaller scale than any kind of major production, but it was still a production. You're still filming something and trying to tell a story, which is exactly what a director does. He creates an imaginary world, uses actors to try and make that world real and tell a story. And so definitely something I want to try in the future.
So do you got a good path forward for that? You got people helping you in that regard.
Yeah, I think I'll get my chance. It's like everything else. You meet the right person, you make the right connections. Like every other thing on this journey, those doors open when they're supposed to open, and hopefully you're in the right mindset and right place to take advantage of those opportunities when they happen. I think if you're pushing or being pushed, it's probably not going to work out right. So you just got to settle in, be diligent, do the best you can, learn as much as you can, and take advantage of the opportunities when they present themselves. They'll eventually present themselves.
As an overarching sort of thing, how did your military service relate? Were you still drawing on that, all throughout your career in the UFC? And do you draw on that? Do you see yourself drawing on it any now with your acting career?
I don't see any way that you can't. From the time I was 19 years old till I was 25 years old, I wore that uniform. I went through that regimented lifestyle, basic training, advanced training, primary leadership school, air assault school, all those physical and mental challenges that all are geared towards a particular mindset and looking at the world in a particular way. And I think I was already predetermined and wired that way to some extent. I was one of those kids that everything had its place. My closet was clean. My room was clean. My friends would come over and throw their shit on the floor, and I'd be like, hey, that doesn't go there. Pick it up. I was already kind of wired that way. So the Army certainly fit me. I had to learn how to roll my socks like they rolled their socks, but still rolling, folding your socks a particular way and everything kind of having its place fit me perfectly for the way my brain was wired. And I think wrestling, some of that is how we learn in wrestling too. You learn by the numbers, level change, penetration, turn the corner, all these little technical pieces that all fit together to make one fluid motion and action possible. And I think that's kind of how the Army teaches you too, by the numbers. You're going to learn to brush your teeth the Army way, all these things that I had to relearn the Army way, but it made sense to me and it seemed to fit me. So I don't think there's anything I've approached that I don't look through those eyes. You talk about those wrestlers' eyes, but I think I have another layer of color in that lens, and it's camouflage. I look through those soldiers' eyes too a lot, at a lot of the problems and things that I face every single day. And I think one hand washed the other. That all kind of fed who I am and led me down this path. I don't think that's ever going to go away. I think if I have a problem or an issue in front of me, that's how I'm going to look at it. I'm going to break it down and solve it by the numbers and get through it. Adapt if I have to, but I'm going to get through it.
Right on. And now you're giving back to the military community now with your work through MVP. Could you tell us a little bit more about that endeavor?
Yeah, that's been a labor of love for sure. It started for me in 2006. I got the chance to go to Iraq and spend 12 days on the ground there with Rich Franklin. We toured around to 5 or 6 different FOBs that month of August in 06, and just hung out with the guys that were there fighting the war, and lived in the shipping containers and all the 125 degree heat and the whole deal. It was an eye opener. It's something I trained to do when I wore the uniform and never had to do. And came back in 07, got the chance to go to Walter Reed in Bethesda in DC. And we put on a barbecue at the Fisher House. One of my friends, Mike Davis, organized this whole thing. Don Fry came, Ken Shamrock came, myself, and then we kind of went to Fort Belvoir, stuffed care packages that were going over to our guys overseas, did the barbecue outside the Fisher House for mothers and wives of wounded veterans that were going through the process of transition and getting fitted for prosthetics, learning to walk again and going through all those surgeries that many of those guys wounded have to go through. And it was going through those wards with those guys and hearing those stories and seeing those moms and seeing those wives and those fathers that were caregivers for their loved one that had worn the uniform or was still technically active duty. And hearing those stories about cars with boots on them in parking garages, and parents losing their houses and losing their jobs, and Uncle Sam can't catch every one of them. There's a whole bunch of them that fall through the cracks financially. So we started the Xtreme Couture GI Foundation to raise some funds to take some of that pressure off of those wounded veterans that are in that transition process. That's where it started for me. xcgif.org, Xtreme Couture GI Foundation.org. At the same time, I was training a lot of professional ball players. With Jay Glazier, we formed a company called MMA Athletics. And we're using combatives and MMA as a form of cross-training for football players and hockey players and lacrosse players. Those are all different types of combative sport. And they don't always look at themselves as combative sports athletes, but I guarantee you every football player is keying off of somebody on the other side of that line every single play. And they are engaged in a form of combat. The rules of engagement may be different, but they're still hand fighting and they're still physically contacting each other. And so changing their mindset and getting them to learn how to hand fight and learn a lot of these things that originated in wrestling and jiu-jitsu and translated well into fighting, also translated into making better football players, better hockey players, better, those contact combative team sports. And through that process, we met a few ball players and got to be friendly with them and seeing them go through the course of their career and retire and walk away from their sport and walk away from that uniform and lose that locker room that was their support system. And through Nate Boyer, he was a Green Beret, played at Texas, was trying to be a long snapper and wanted a shot at the pros. He came through Jay Glazier and myself, and we kind of helped him along the way. He actually got a tryout, made the Seattle Seahawks. And it was, again, through that, the comparing those two groups of people and their transitions, the similarities were stark and very real. Stripped away a huge piece of their identity when you took them out of the Army or you took them out of that pro sport. And a lot of them struggle. A lot of them struggle with darkness and depression and alcohol and drugs and all kinds of other things. The divorce rate, they learn, that's a huge piece of who they are. So that's where MVP, Emerging Vets and Players, grew out of that experience. Nate Boyer and Jay Glazier came up with this idea to get the two groups together, get them training again, break down those barriers and those walls, and then spend some time in a group huddle, or we call a fireside chat or a huddle, and let them talk. There's nobody else in there but them. So it's a place where they can show those vulnerabilities. We as athletes train not to, and we as soldiers are certainly trained not to show those vulnerabilities and weaknesses. They're frowned upon in our profession. So getting them in a place where they're okay sharing and letting some of that stuff out. And, you don't know, that guy across the map from you may have gone through that same exact thing. And how did he get through it could be the biggest thing that helps you get through that same thing. rather than looking down the wrong end of your damn gun, you develop some new tools from somebody you respect and know that's gone through that same transition. And that's a very powerful thing. And that's what MVP in the last 5 going on 6 years has been. Started in LA. I opened the chapter in Vegas at my gym there. We're in Chicago. We're in Atlanta. We're in New York City now. We're looking at San Diego, Oklahoma City, Dallas, Texas, and Seattle as new chapters as we expand. And, we had to kind of make the call and adjust with the COVID. The worst thing we can do for a lot of these guys is isolate them. And COVID requirements, we're going to force a lot of these guys to not be able to go to the gym and get that workout in and get that camaraderie that they miss so bad from the service or from the professional sport. They show up, in Vegas every Friday. We have 40 or 50 guys that we were a pro ball player or a veteran that come train and share and get connected to that community. And so taking that away from them was a very dangerous thing. So getting on a Zoom call just like this with at veteranplayers.org, there's a Zoom meeting for all 5 of our chapters that anybody that's a vet or a former player can come join now. And that's kind of expanded. We're getting 80 people showing up on these Zoom calls, even though most of them had not ever actually been to a physical MVP meeting. So in some ways, the COVID forced us to adapting. We grew because word spread, and those people didn't want to be isolated. They could work out in their living room, and they could share their stories with the things that they were struggling, whether it was about COVID or the VA or their wife or whatever that was. And that became a hugely powerful thing.
And that's really interesting. I've thought about that a lot lately too, about how we in the military, definitely we have this huge amount of trust for one another and this huge camaraderie. So focusing on that, I think a lot of people just focus on like the trauma aspect of military, of deployments, of stuff people might see, but I don't think enough people really realize that one of the things people are missing so much when they leave, and I didn't realize it was so similar with professional sports, but you leave these organizations and those were the people you trusted. You had this huge amount of trust. You knew those people were going to be behind you all the time. So, I really love that you guys are, you're focusing on that camaraderie and helping, helping them get that back.
Yeah. Well, it could be a double-edged sword. People talk about the 22 we lose to suicide PTSD every day. And that's a ripple effect. One guy in your unit or one, Junior Seau, one of these pro ball players who's struggled with that transition and the depression from not feeling like he was the king of the world anymore. One of those guys makes a bad decision and offs himself, and there's a ripple effect. Everybody's looking at that. Everybody that was part of that group or part of that says, oh man, I thought that guy was doing all right. And then now they start to internalize that. And the next thing you know, they're going down that same rabbit hole. So having a place where we can come put our arms around each other and share some of that stuff, share those feelings, share some of those pitfalls and those things kind of smooths the water. And we're pretty proud of the fact in the 5 years that we've been doing, MVP, we literally just lost our first member to suicide. And it was devastating. We had to really kind of step up when that happened. And it just happened probably largely because of this quarantine and all this other stuff. But, we've given guys alternatives. We've given guys tools. Most of these guys, and I don't know how you are, but I don't want some knucklehead from Stanford wearing a bow tie and a PhD telling me that I'm broken. He couldn't do the things that we've done, whether it was pro athletics or wearing that uniform. They're not broken. Those are very, very special people. That's a small percentage of the population that is able to operate at that level and do those things that those guys do. That doesn't make them broken. That makes them pretty special. So changing that narrative, giving them a place where they have like-minded individuals where they can share those struggles because they don't want to hear about it from somebody who doesn't understand, doesn't get it, has been very, very powerful.
Did guys have do you guys have difficulty initially, opening up during your fireside chat sessions, and how do you get people to open up?
It's yeah. Well, part of it is that workout. I'm going to spend the first 30 to 45 minutes training, sweating, and to a man, every one of those guys, whether it was a military uniform or a professional athlete's uniform, would say, "Man, you should have seen me when I was in uniform. I was in great shape." We all have a tendency when we make that transition to let ourselves go a little bit. Real life, we're not getting paid to run every morning and train all the time and do the stuff that we did. So physically, those guys change, but there's something about being there, sweating, going through a difficult workout when the guy next to you is doing the same thing, whether you know him or not. That creates a little connection. And then when we sit down after that workout, that has broken down some of those normal barriers to just opening up and saying what's going on, sharing where you came from, who you are. And then once that talking starts, it's really easy to say, "Oh man, we've had everything from seeing these guys go from homelessness and joblessness to finding apartments, getting jobs, getting back to being, finding them a new purpose, a new thing to fill that void." And that's what they're all missing, is that purpose, that camaraderie, that locker room, but that purpose, that service. I mean, that's what makes you feel special, that giving back and doing something that you feel like you're contributing to, something outside and bigger than yourself. And so I think all those things happen through that contact and getting those groups together.
So are you still staying really physically active?
As much as I can. The travel schedule's it hasn't been as rigorous with all this quarantine crap, but we still train. It keeps me sane. I don't do a lot of hard sparring or hard grappling anymore. The discs in the neck are pretty wore out from all the years of athletics, but and I don't really want to mess around and have to have a neck surgery or something like that. So I'm pretty diligent about taking care of my neck, but at the same time, I love to train. I love, light sparring with friends and clients and people that are connected with MVP or our gyms. And that keeps me going, keeps me smiling for sure.
Is that where you get your, the fix that you need for your competitive edge, or are there any other places you're grabbing that from?
I think a lot of that competitive appetite is being fed through competing for acting jobs, going out and auditioning, trying to make the right connections and go out and put myself out there. I'm competing with a whole pool of other guys that are like me that want those acting jobs too. So I look at it like that. This is a competition between that guy and me, and which one of us is going to get that part and be able to play that role. That's certainly competitive. I think some of that competitiveness in me has mellowed a little too as I've gotten older. When I made the decision to walk away from the sport and go out on my own terms, that took me a while to come to terms with that. I was thankful that I had that new purpose. I could transition from fighting and being considered a professional athlete to diving in headfirst to acting and trying to act and get acting jobs 100%. So that's filled that competitive void. That's also become my purpose. My purpose before was to be the best in the world at fighting. Now I wanted to be the best actor, director, and producer that I can be in this industry.
Right on. And you've mentioned your kids and trying to balance, your all of these personal goals. Can you talk a little bit to that? Specifically your relationships with your kids and how it's been, through the years and how it's going now.
That balance is always the biggest challenge, especially as a professional athlete. There's something very egocentric about being an athlete. You have to be a little selfish, honestly, to focus and do all the hard training and 24/7, do all the things that you need to do to be the best at your sport. It takes a lot of time and energy, and honestly, you have to be a little bit selfish. And if anybody has suffered, it's been my kids. They've spent a shit ton of time in gymnasiums, on wrestling mats, certainly for years and years and years as a wrestler before I ever started getting paid. They grew up that way, and then it was part of what I did, and they were kind of along for the journey. Some of that rubbed off on them. They both kind of found their ways to deal with that. Thankfully, it was always positive, but it was definitely a challenge. They're the ones that suffered. They're the ones that lost time with me, time with their dad. The family vacation usually involved the national tournament or something that revolved around the sport that I was involved in, pursuing those dreams. So they're the ones that have absolutely made those sacrifices. And that's one of the things that transitioning to acting helped me realize. As I became a professional fighter and then an actor, a public person, now you start having people come up to you and want your autograph, want a picture with you. Now, that's a great thing. That means you're doing something right in your profession. But at the same time, when I'm with my kids or my girlfriend or when I was married with a wife and people come do that, that's time they're taking away from them. That's their time. And it's kind of a lose-lose. If I say, no, I can't take a picture or do that autograph, that guy or gal walks away going, oh, that guy's an asshole. And if I say yes, then I'm taking away from time for my family. That's their time, and they've already made huge sacrifices in their time with me and my attention in order for me to do what I do. And so that's kind of the catch-22. That's the lose-lose situation. And when I put it to somebody that way, and I learned this from Terry Crews working on Expendables 1. He was there with his 5 kids and his wife, and we were at lunch. People were coming up to us, and he was the one that said, hey, you know what, I'd love to do that normally, but I'm with my family. This is their time. I can't take away from their time. Now, if that fan walks away saying, oh, that guy's an asshole, actually, he's the one or she's the one that looks like the asshole, not you, if that makes sense. So that was something I learned from Terry as transitioning from athletics to being a celebrity and acting. That shined a light on who really made the sacrifices. Yes, I made a ton of sacrifices, but a lot of those sacrifices I made were with my family, were with the people that loved me and supported me so that I could achieve those things I wanted to achieve, if that makes sense. And that's something, and just recognizing that and being able to say those things to them and let them know how much I appreciate all the support that they gave me all those years and the sacrifices that they made so that I could achieve the things that I wanted to achieve, was a big part of that. We've always gotten along pretty well. Like any relationship, it has its ups and downs. There were some years there, with my daughter who was out doing her own thing, and I, same. I think there was a stretch there with my son too, where maybe we weren't as close. He's busy living his life, doing the things that he wants to do. And doesn't have to worry about where I'm at and what I'm doing anymore. But at the same time, we managed to stay close, to support each other, in a lot of our endeavors. They were always very supportive of me, and I've been very blessed with that. It could have been a lot different. And it's cost me a couple marriages, let's be honest. That selfishness, I don't know what else to call it, in wanting and needing to go train and do these camps and travel and all this other stuff that took me away from those wives. And I've been divorced 3 times. So that's definitely been a factor in all of those. Now, some of it was immaturity, some of it was poor decisions, but I think being so focused on that singular goal of being the best at what I was trying to do had a ripple effect, and there were sacrifices made across the board, not just sacrifices I was making, but those people that loved me made those sacrifices too.
Talking to you and all these topics that we've been talking about, you've got this huge amount of positivity that you present, and I hope I'm not going too dark on this, but when you talk about your dad and how did you, like, some people would take that and they would go to a very dark place. Do you know how you use that to you know, to be a driving force? It sounds like you use that. It's like a really negative event, but you used it for a huge amount of positivity.
Yeah, I can only, it's hard. It certainly could have been the impetus to make a lot of bad decisions and do a lot of bad things. And there's a lot of people that use that as their excuse to fail, to make poor choices, to do a whole bunch of other things that are negative. I had a very positive influence in my mother. She worked a couple jobs as a single parent, kept us busy, kept us in athletics to try and keep us out of trouble. She had a diligent work ethic and a sharp mind. And I think, all those attributes that she had as the only person we had to look up to and guide us were a huge influence, certainly on me, and I think on my sisters as well. I was the oldest, so some of those responsibilities as the only male and the oldest in the group fell on me too. And I think that's part of being the oldest in the hierarchy of the family too. That responsibility a lot of times falls on that older sibling. And I think that those all allowed me to make positive choices. Now, they weren't all positive. I made mistakes. I screwed up plenty of times, but never to the point where it cost me, too dearly. Because I had either a coach or my mom or one of my friends' parents kicking me in the ass. They say it takes a village. Well, that was definitely the case for me growing up. I had Mark's friend, Mark's mom and dad, that called them mom bags. I think I had 3 or 4 different moms that were my friends' parents, but my mom was a single parent, getting it done, working 2 jobs a lot of times. The chore list had to be done, or there was going to be hell to pay when mom got home and they weren't done, which meant I had to do as much as I could, but I also had to delegate to my sisters, and some of that was on them as well. I can't, other than that, her example and her positivity, I could have used it absolutely as an excuse to do and be a lot of other things that would not have been very positive. I guess I'd always had that kind of positive, cheery, happy-go-lucky. That's what my mom called me when I was little. She said I was just a happy-go-lucky kid. Nothing ever seemed to get me down or bother me, and I'm fortunate, I guess. I don't really know. Sure, I've had some things happen in my life that were dark and depressing, and part of that was not ever having a father figure and seeing other friends and other guys that had that father figure, and I use that. Maybe that's that old school mentality. I was going to do it despite them. I was going to prove them wrong. I was going to do it despite them. And I think maybe we've moved away. These younger generations have moved away from that kind of mentality. You used to be able to coaches coach differently. Coaches badmouthed you and told you you weren't shit, and you were going to go out and prove them wrong. That was the way coaches did things back in the old. They were all hard asses. That would never fly nowadays. It would never work with the mentality. It seems like the two. Not that they're, it's just different. It's not the same. But I don't know. I guess that not to get too crazy into politics or any of that, but people start talking about white privilege, and it really irks me. I've gotten where I've gotten through making good choices and working my ass off, and had every other excuse that a lot of these other people use to fail in a single parent household with no male father figure. I could have made a lot of other choices too. So this whole, not to get off on a sidetrack, but that's one of the statements that gets said or thrown around now that really, really kind of pisses me off, frankly.
Yeah, I totally understand. It's it totally ignores other people's trials and tribulations. and it really diminishes that, and I think it's definitely unhealthy to to categorize a bunch of people that are feeling a bunch of pain, or experience a bunch of pain and went through a bunch of hardship, and really diminishing that, and it's sort of, it's like they invalidate it to some people.
That's what it feels like to me. When someone says that, and I've never had anybody say that to my face. I've just heard in general that I don't even know what to call it, definition, or that somehow we got a leg up just because of the color of our skin, and I don't buy it. It's insulting to me as somebody who came through a lot of those same exact circumstances that people of color have come through and still managed to succeed. They're perfect. I think it's a racist thing to say. They're just as capable of succeeding. If I can do it, they can certainly do it too. And again, it's just one of those things that really irks me, because I know where I came from and I know what I went through to get where I've been and what I've accomplished. So and that feels like a kick in the nuts to me to say something like that.
How are your relationships with? Do you keep up with a lot of the fighters you fought with and trained with? Do you keep up with the guys that you knew from your military days?
Yeah, I'm on a thread with I think 11 or 12 of the guys I served with. We all wrestled in various levels and stages during my 4 years on the All Army Wrestling Team, and I talk and hear from those guys almost every single day. There was the group of guys that I was in the Army with. I have a group of high school friends that I still am in touch with through the junior high and high school days. Mark Bagley, Jeff Lynn, Don Totten, Tim Deachman. Those were all guys I grew up with playing soccer and wrestling and Boy Scouts and junior high and high school. We're still friends, and if that's the one positive that these whole social media things have, it is that ability to reconnect with people that you're not in the proximity of anymore. And that is a positive thing. Same with the Army guys. That 6 years of my life, I'm good friends with a lot of those guys to this day. We sweat and bled together, and I think there's a bond there that just doesn't go away. My college teammates, I'm in contact with a lot of them on a fairly regular basis and see them through the fighting and wrestling world too. That's the one thing I miss about fighting. Fighting was the impetus to bring all of those people from those different parts of my life together. They all wanted to come to Vegas or come to Boston or come to the fights. And it was like old home week for me. I got to see all my high school, college, and Army friends because they all came to watch the fight. And they would all come to my workouts that week, and I'd get to catch up with them and see them. And I don't miss getting punched in the face, but I miss seeing those guys and being around those guys at the fights for sure. But we still stay in touch.
Yeah, that's awesome. How about your sisters? How's your relationship with your sisters? Are you guys close, or you keep up with each other very well?
We're good. Yeah. Still close with my sisters. Yolanda comes to some of my charity motorcycle rides and some of that stuff over the years. Tracy used to host Thanksgiving every year. And so, every couple of years I make it back up to Seattle for Thanksgiving with Mom, and Tracy always hosts it, my youngest sister. And she, we talk, we share anecdotes and stories, and, they're probably the people that know me the best. They knew me when I was little and, still peed the bed and, all the way down. They know me. They know, and so I just don't think that'll ever go away. They're like any other relationship. They have their ebbs and flows. You're closer at times. You share things, and then we're all living our own lives. Yolanda's in Montana, close to her kids and her grandkids. Tracy's still up in the Seattle area, still close to Mom, where Mom and we grew up. So the distance makes it more challenging, but we talk and we see each other here and there, and we're still very close. I think always have been. Never really, never really been a time where we're estranged from each other. We've maybe been doing our own thing and living our own lives, but I think we've always still been and maintained that connection.
Right on. That's great. So whether acting or fighting or being a good dad, what's something that served you well that anyone could use to own their craft, make themselves a better person?
Well, I think it's difficult to answer all those categories because I think a lot of them require different things. I think certainly as a father, it requires consistency. Kids can adapt to, they're going to adapt to anything as long as it's consistent. It's when it's inconsistent that it becomes challenging and hard to, to figure out. I think as an athlete and an actor, I think it's passion and diligence. If you figure out what you have a passion for, you're gonna do whatever you need to do to get to be the best at that, to get where you want to go, to accomplish what it is you want to accomplish in that passion. I think that's what the pursuit of excellence is all about. It's not always about winning or losing. It's about pursuing your passion with everything that you have, every talent and every ability that you have. And I think that's that wrestler's mindset that carried over to fighting. That's what's carried over into acting. That's what got me through 4 years of college at Oklahoma State and 6 years in the Army was that same mindset. I had a passion for the sport of wrestling for sure. Even though I thought it was gone, I found my way back on that mat. And I think being a student of the game, being diligent, studying, paying attention, again, that humility, being willing to open yourself up and realize that every single person you meet, you can learn something from. And it's up to you to have an open mind and an open heart to do that. I think that transcends any endeavor, anything that you're going to get involved in. If you come at it with that mindset, you're going to be all right. You're going to do well.
I'll ask, what would you ask, or is there anything you'd ask yourself, or is there anything you'd like to, just riff on for a little bit, or if you had something at you.
I think we've covered a lot. I'm excited. This summer is opened up a new window and a new opportunity for me. I became a grandfather in June.
Well, congratulations!
And my daughter had my first Yeah, very cool. And just find out that my son Ryan and his wife are due now with our second grandchild in May next year, and we just found out the sex of that. That's going to be a boy. So I've got a boy and a girl now in the grandchild category, which is pretty cool. So I'm excited about that, and get new little videos and new little pictures of Evie, every week, and just seeing how quickly she's growing and changing, and very excited to see this new addition, the new little grandbaby boy. So yeah, it's official. I'm an old bastard now. I've got grandkids and everything. So yeah, I think I'll just settle into the rocking chair and embrace it full on.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. Randy, thank you so much for doing this. I'm sort of running out of questions here, but I did want to say thank you. It's been awesome. It's awesome experience. It's really cool to just pick your brain and just hear your story and just the positivity, man. I think that was the thing that came across the most with me, is like just your ability to stay positive through so much, and let that positivity sort of guide your the way you worked your craft in in fighting and in acting. It's been awesome having a chance to talk to you.
I appreciate it. You know what they teach us in the Army? You got to embrace the suck, right? It's just part of it. It's what you have to do. You might as well do it with a smile on your face and turn it into something positive and stay in headed in the right direction. That's, I don't know. That's just how I've always felt about it.
Cool, man. Again, thank you. Hope maybe sometime I can make it out to your gym, meet you in person.
All right. That'd be cool. We're always there. Vegas, Xtreme Couture in Vegas is always open. We're open to the public. And if you make it to Vegas, make sure and let me know. Hit me up.
All right. Sure thing. Thanks a lot. I'm going to sign this out.
Yeah, man. Take care.
You too.
Have a good one.
You too. Thanks.